Right.
Hey everybody, it's Tinderbox Meetup, and it's the end of July. How did that happen? I'm Mark Bernstein, and this is going to be Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm the Tinderbox designer. Uh, Bit of news. This week began Summerfest, the artisanal software festival at artisanalsoftwarefestival.com, and you can save money on some cool products. Lots of good software all sold directly by the developers. Coming very soon, probably next week, is Tinderbox 9.6. That's why my hair is gray, my eyelids are drooping, and I'm probably going to have to run early, but I wanted to be here in case there were any questions. So, already been a great question on the forum this morning, a specific document in which you could get, if you had a list, you could get my list dot bracket one or my list at two, but you could not get my list at zero, the first element of the list. And that had us going for a good hour or so, but we did find the punchline, and it's great. Check it out on the forum. Next week, we've got Joel Chan from Stanford. And the following week at the meetup, we have Mike Rode, who is the author of the Sketchbooking Handbook and is behind the wonderful sketchbook font that's packaged with Tinderbox. So, two meetups to look forward to. Uh, so, without further delay, here's Michael Becker.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. Typical Tinderbox Meetup forum. We go around the room and new people introduce themselves if they are so inclined and tell us what they're interested in the whole idea of Tinderbox and learning management software and what they're doing in that environment. We then dig into individual projects and then address any theme we have. This week, we do not have a theme. There are several individual projects that we can dig into. I would very much like maybe Mr. Anderson can walk us through the solution for the .0 example, because that could be a number of like learning tips that could come out of that example. And
Is
then
this is this a setup? Are you setting him up?
I am very as I'm apt to do. And then if we have time, I can walk us through a qualitative data analysis process and working with intervals that Mark and I figured out actually earlier this morning for a live project I'm working on. But Craig S., I don't think we met you before. Your face is new.
I am new, and I'm probably the youngest person you've ever seen on here.
Pretty close, pretty close. Yeah. So what's going on? Welcome to the community.
So yeah, I'm a college
Here.
student. I've been on the forum a few times. Probably know it from my art history project. I was working on that. I was one who asked about getting the date range added to be like really high, negative in the BCE era.
Okay.
But I love Tinderbox because it has so much free form in terms of the map. So I like looking at the map view and being able to have an infinite canvas. But I just love being able to learn new things. So that's why I like Tinderbox.
Awesome. Welcome. And do you have any project you're working on right now? What drew you particularly to today's session versus just generally? Or you had the time and you wanted to show up today?
I just had the time today. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome always. So this is great. Okay. Anybody else have any topics, questions they're working on? If not, Mr. Oh, and then Mark, I have to leave. I've got my hard stop in an hour at the top of the hour. So if someone can finish off the last 30 minutes, if you're around, Mr. Anderson, that'd be great. Okay. You're on mute.
Sorry, just to check. So, is it the usual routine that we usher everyone out of the room and just leave it running, and then?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll do that.
Okay. Yep. I'll usher out the waifs and strays at the end. Then. Yep.
Awesome. And then, and with that in mind, do you want to? What do we want to do? Do we want to jump into my time stamping examples or play around?
Yeah, we can, and I'm happy to talk through the other thing you mentioned, which I take no credit for the solution to, which Mark Bernstein just posted in the forum, which is one thing I didn't think.
Why don't you walk us through that first? Because
it's actually interesting, probably because it's a version of a problem lots of us probably face, oops, close that. Well, I'm just going to open up a couple of files. Bear with me a second. Test stamp, and I will share my screen, which I think is this. So, is this the one? Yeah. So, starting with a perfectly sort of reasonable question that I'm doing something with a stamp. When it finishes, I don't get the right result. Oh, sorry, I'm not.
Sorry, you're sharing the screen.
Am I sharing now?
No, you are.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and it's a thread called stamp behavior between documents. And so what they had was something where they'd have a bit of text like this.
Oh, by the way, let's pause you real quick, though. The use case here is awesome. Basically, he manages his family trivia night with this. So it's a bunch of questions. So the question and the answer are on the same line, and he wants to go and parse that out from managing trivia night, which I think is a really cool.
Exactly. So he wants it 5 months work, but effectively, so he's managed to acquire a lot of questions, and what he wants is to have this as the question and this is the answer. But I has a stamp that he's using. Put this on the screen so you can see it. His very simple stamp. We're going to take the contents of the text. We're going to split it on the question mark, and then we're going to put the second item in the list, because you'd expect 2 items. Will go into the answer field here, and the other one will get put back as a text. But let's see what happens when we run this. So now we've got a list that has 2 items, and it has the answer in the right place, but no text. So what is going on? And the interesting part of this for me was tearing it down. They very kindly then presented another file that had some of the same information that didn't have the same problem. And this is always a useful thing to do, because it's easily done. You hit a problem, you're thinking, I've done something really simple and it's not working. So you keep hammering on the same problem. So a really good thing was they sensibly did, basically responding to some questions that were given. They came up with something that is similar. And let me find one. So if I now run the same stamp, I get the correct answer. So we get a list, which we expected, and the second item goes into the answer, and the first item goes into the text. And because we did a split on the question mark, that's why the question mark has disappeared there. But that's a by the by. Probably like others, I started looking at this, and I picked out one of the things, and I actually saw things like when I did some split. Oh, sorry, I cleaned this up. But I noticed that all the text had like 3 spaces at the beginning. And I noticed this because when I did a split and I looked at the list values, someone might have it. But anyway, the list values had spaces at the front, which is very, very odd. It's not a thing you expect to see. But it turned out not to be the issue, but it did remind me of the fact that we can use, if we find we've got extraneous spaces at the front or end of a string, be it text or something else, we can use the trim function to get rid of those, and that's why it's actually gone from this example. But if you were to re-download this file that the user put on their forum, you'd actually find that quite a lot of the questions had about 3 spaces on the front. So it's not that. So what else can we do? Well, we can go to the Tinderbox inspector, and we can look at the agents and rule tabs, and we see there are no rules. There are no edicts. On the info tab, we know there are no agents. So why is that a good thing to check? Well, it's we know we're not sawing off the branch we're sitting on, but something else might be doing that. So we might have something running that's, if nothing else, getting in the way of what we're doing. But there's no automation here at all, which was really, really, really odd. And that's about the point where I got stuck. And before I came on the forum, I noticed that Mark had posted the answer, which really is odd. Now, a long time ago, it turns out that I don't think you're allowed to do this anymore. Somehow, an attribute had got created called 0. And so when you do something like a stamp like this, and whether you would do that, or you might see people sometimes use an older but equally applicable method of saying my list at at. And both those last two lines do exactly the same. This is probably becoming the norm for all sorts of good reasons I won't dive into here. Anyway, neither of these are working because basically what's happening is this is being seen by Tinderbox, which is knowing that we haven't, or rather being given no more context, is right. So you want the value of attribute 0, and if I was to look at this, if I was to look at the value of, that's interesting. I don't think can I set that as, I might need to use displayed attributes to do this. So there we go. And in fact, so it turns out that also that attribute 0 is in fact a Boolean, which is why we're seeing a tick box here. And I can just go back and confirm that if I look at 0, and lo and behold, yes, here in this list we see it's a Boolean. So we've asked for the value of 0, of attribute 0, which is an empty Boolean, which basically gives us false or 0 or nothing. And so, lo and behold, when we run our stamp and we ask for the value of 0, we do in fact get 0. So the application is working completely fine. And this is one of the more exotic examples I've seen where some accidental thing, I doubt the person that made this probably knows how it happened, but they happen to have an attribute called 0. So top tip. They have an attribute called 0 or 1. Or
well, I can tell you how it happened. It's through the importing of a spreadsheet where there was a column head called 0. And so when they dropped in the CVS file, that created the attribute.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. That's one of the simpler answers.
I noticed a comment from David Eddy. Actually, the Elgin marbles are not just in the British Museum and the Parthenon. They're in several other places, including Broomhall House, just outside Edinburgh, which is where the Earl of Elgin lived. But that's a by the by. So I think, that's the, so that's the run through to that. Does that raise any questions for anyone before I stop sharing?
Well, a couple. While we're at it, let's go through the mechanics. So can you explain the dot at and or the use of brackets in the context of split? So now that we know the source of the problem, why don't you talk about the mechanics of split, building a list, and parsing those out? Okay, so let me just pick because just so people know, I mean, once you figure this out, this is something you might be using quite often when you're analyzing. Yeah.
So in fact, I tell you what, I'm going to now we know we don't need this. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go and delete this. So we can now what we should see is if I go back to the stamps and I stamp this note, we get the desired thing. But actually, probably what we want to do is it won't make a difference here, but if I select another question mark, another question. So what split does is it can use a regular expression, which is why we're seeing the backslash in front of the question mark here. So we have a bit of text. And real quick, why do you put a backsplash in front of a question mark? Well, I'll come down in a sec. So step back. So we have a string. We have a run of text that in this case is living in the text of the note, but it could be in a string type attribute. And we want to split it into its two composite parts, which if I just get this back a second, started like this. Now, you could, and the obvious place to split it is on the question mark, because we know the question mark is one thing that will always be there. And they did a very simple split here. We could go for a split with a space after it, but maybe there isn't a space, depending on the sort of the data you started with. So this is a very good first start. The how we do the split, how we identify this, is basically this argument that you pass to the .split command, which we're seeing in there. And the reason there's a backslash there is because the value, the argument that you give to split is in fact interpreted as a regular expression, or RegEx for short, which does all kinds of neat, funky stuff, because instead of just being able to use a literal thing like split on the letter A, you can make more complicated patterns that you want to split on. And the reason I'm having to use a backslash here to escape it is it so happens that question mark has a special meaning in a regular expression. So when we're using something like a question mark or a round parentheses bracket, we have to put a backslash in front of it, and that tells the parser in Tinderbox that no, don't treat this as a regular expression character, treat it as a literal character. So basically we're saying to split, I want you to take the string at the input, which here is text, and I want you to split it every time you see a question mark character. And if we look at this text here, we'll see there's one question mark, and therefore we're going to expect to get two pieces. One is Kilimanjaro and one is Tanzania, or Tanzania, whichever you want to call it. And split removes the split character. So we aren't going to get the question mark back. We're going to get this bit and this bit. And you can see that in the list. So you can probably just see a semicolon there. So sure enough, my list has turned into 2 items based on the original text. And the next thing they wanted to do is they wanted to put the answer. They wanted to put what came after the question mark into a user attribute they called answer. So they want item 2 in the list, so which we can see in my list. They want item number 2. So you might wonder why they're saying my list 1. This is because lists use basically zero-based numbering is, I suppose, the most regular term for this, which goes really back to the starting of computing, when every bit of memory you had cost real money. So you started at 0, which you didn't. If you have 0, you don't have to store anything. So you're on an immediate winner. Now, these days, we don't need to worry about that, but these things live on. So sometimes, and they vary in Tinderbox, and you will notice if you look in place at ATBRef, it will say if something is 0-based or 1-based. And all that means is that, as you can see in this stamp, we're going to use the first, that's the first list in the item, and that's the second list. We started in an odd place because we started explaining why you couldn't get item 0. But anyway, when you split a list, so in this list here, that is item, that's item 0 up to the semicolon, and the next bit is Tanzania. And you'll also notice that there's a space at the beginning of the second term, which you don't really need. And you'll notice that when it's actually pasted into, as it turns up in as a value of answer, that space is actually gone. So Tinderbox is actually quite helpful in this regard. Generally, if it finds stray space at the back or front end of a bit of text and it's being told to put into another attribute, it will normally trim it off. We could also have, for instance, we could have said, you won't see a difference because in this case, it still gets done. But if you wanted to make sure that that the second part didn't have any space at all, you can use the trim command. And that basically says trim off any extraneous white space. You can do a bit more, and if you read up the documentation for trim, you'll find that there. But I don't want to give you too much detail and get off track. So we can from our list we've created, we could say that. But another way, I'm just going to make a new. another way we could look at this is we don't actually need, whoops, where are we? There we go. We don't actually need to use a list at all, because we could, for instance, we could say, if for instance, if we didn't need the whole of the starting text, we just say we want to get the answer and we want to stick it. We want to get to the last part of the sentence and we just want to stick it in answer. So we could say that. So we just say answer equals text split into two pieces. We'll say at one, and I want you to trim it. And the reason I'm showing you that is this shows you how these so-called dot commands can be used. So we've got three different commands all chained together. And what happens is, as the code is run, each thing is done. So the split is done. The outcome of the split is passed into the at command. So split makes a list. At gives us the second item in the list. Trim trims off the any spare spaces, and the whole lot is passed into answer. So what was being done here in the original code that the user had set up makes a lot of sense. If it doesn't work first time, have a look and see what the list produces. And this is why they were understandably confused, because all the right information was there. But oddly, when they asked for a certain part of the list. And so one of the things I actually did, some of the early checks I ran, was I looked at the list. I got the list to report how many items it has. It has 2 items. So the list is reporting us what we think it is. It just didn't want to give us a particular bit. I see Dave's got a hand up.
Right. Foolish hobgoblin of little minds. The designator for the operators in split and at and trim is parents. You place the thing to be operated on in parents. In my list, the index, so at the index of the list is 1 in the at thing, and that's in parents. The index of the list in my list is square bracket.
We could do.
My question is, does it matter? Is parents the appropriate for those type of text operators?
Because we're doing this live in a demo, I thought I wouldn't run the second version, but I believe, and Mark may correct me, but the second version should work. The reason it might not is the parser has got to realize, okay, I want you to do the split and give me the first item of the list. So I've what I'm doing there is collapsing two things into one, and this again, like all these things, it's lovely to be less verbose. I see a thumbs up from Mark, who's got a comment. I'll hand over just a second. So this certainly is fewer characters to type. This works just as well. And to be perfectly honest, when you're sort of digging into this for the first time, being a bit more explicit is generally a help, because if nothing else, it just helps you. If it doesn't work, you can read back through it and say, right, this is what I intended to do. Yeah, I definitely said I wanted to do this. So if it doesn't work, it's likely that either I've misunderstood how the command worked, or I've in some way perhaps fed it a wrong input. Mark.
Yeah. Further on Dave Rogers' good question. The square brackets and the parentheses are different. Parentheses are used here to pass arguments to an operator. For example, at. Square brackets are used to extract an element from a list. And so you can't put square brackets where you want them to place to pass information to a operator. That's got to be a parenthesis. And if you use a parenthesis where you mean square bracket, Tinderbox is going to try to pass information to a function, and you aren't going to have that function, so nothing's going to happen.
So I understand. I just want to clarify the point of the question is that both 0 and 1 refer to an index position in a list, and we reference them in two different ways depending on one is an operator, the other I'm not sure what you call my list that just points to that element in my list in with the square brackets. So
yeah, and I've added, in fact, when for the version of ATBRef, which will go out when 9.6 goes out, I've added actually about 25 articles, short articles, basically, which are all to do with, so what does square brackets mean, and what do round brackets mean, and what do curly brackets mean? And most of them actually also have more than one meaning in different contexts.
I did read that.
But it was one of those things that was someone I'd raised questions. So, well, why don't you just explain? Why don't you explain what all these things mean? I was amazed at actually how many variations there are. It just shows, what fun it is to have a toolbox. You can do all sorts of things, not necessarily what you meant to do, but what you said to do. So square brackets, yeah. Also, so a change that is just coming. It sort of works at the moment, but it's becoming more codified. Is that you can also use square brackets now to explicitly say I want a list. So we might, I'll just do it in the text here. We might have in the old days said something like my list equals and effectively we created a 2-item list. Now what you can do is you can go and you might think, well, why not leave a good thing well alone? What's really useful in this is I think one of the avenues that sort of came to this is when we got dictionaries. One of the first things that people started asking is, but wait a minute, I need a dictionary key value that's more than one thing. But a dictionary is basically a list where each list item is a key, a colon, and a value. Now, if we make a list of values, we get a key, a colon, a value, semicolon, value, finished by a semicolon. So where does the poor old parser know where the key value? So now what we can do is we might have as a dictionary, we might have our meal is our key is meal, and we could have and this is now all one key value pair. And when the dictionary data is being read, there's a semicolon that marks the key value pair, but it also knows that nested inside that is a list. And then sort of because we have that, we can now begin to do this. What I will probably do, because it's all quite new, I didn't want to do it for this release, but I will probably go back and I'll normalize all, because in a sense, this is where we're going. I'll go back and I'll change all the old examples so that at least people starting out from afresh will have a consistent run across the piece. Yes, David.
I just want to point out to the non-programmers here that the use of the word dictionary is highly misleading. No giggling there, Mark B. There's a term called JSON, JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. So what Mark Anderson is talking about is this JSON format, which is 2 values. The unique key is the first, and the second is the value, another value. Not related to Oxford or Merriam-Webster. Completely unrelated.
No, but everything has multiple meanings. Because here in UK, normally if you say brackets, most people mean to what I'm here deliberately referring to as parentheses, because there are variations even within a supposedly common language that divides the two sides of the Atlantic. So these things abound. But your point is well made. It's also confusing because actually JSON, which is very popular. If you ever lift the hood of some complex page on the web, you may well find there are bucket loads of JSON being passed around. It's a very simple way that you can pass data as plain text. And most of us never need to see it. We don't need to know about it. It's also slightly different in its rules because it's written in JavaScript, which just like Action Code, has some rules as to what you may not do. But they look broadly similar. But the notion of Square brackets, which in Tinderbox is a list, is effectively what JavaScript would call an array, which is a list by any other name. And Tinderbox will, in fact, now allow nested lists or lists within lists. So we can have, oops, sorry, this looking button. You'd use commas in JavaScript, you would use semicolons in Tinderbox, but we can have a list that's like this. So that's or actually, let's put square brackets around it. That is a list of 4 items, where the third item is a list. To be perfectly honest, don't worry about it. If it's all a bit confusing, you don't need it until you need it. When you do need it, it's really useful to have it there. And also, in following on the same vein, curly brackets like this, which you're probably most used to seeing if you write something like a conditional statement or an each loop. Curly brackets are also now used to indicate to Tinderbox that you're writing a dictionary. And this saves us having to do something like so this might be the new way of doing it. And the old way would be the way that you'd used to do it. If you looked up now, you'd see that the suggested way would be, and they all still work. So don't worry unduly if you are doing things a different way. If it works, it works. Don't feel obliged to go back and change every single line of code. I mean, if it amuses you, do, but don't worry that it's all going to break if you don't. But I show this just to make the point. Oops, sorry, I missed out the curly brace there. So this line here, if that's clear enough for people to see on their screen, is basically telling my dictionary, I'm going to give you a dictionary, in this case, of 1 key pair, which includes a key and a value that's a list that a value that is a list. And this is doing exactly the same. Excuse the typographic quotes. I forgot to turn smart quotes off. Another good lesson in that, if you're using a note to type action code, it's a really good idea. What we used to do is we used to actually use the code prototype, but one of the things that clarified just recently is there is even better is if let me just take all this.
And then when you're done, Mark, if you have a pause, because I got to leave in 26 minutes. So Let's hop over and I'll set us up, and then you can finish the final 30 minutes with the file.
Oh, sorry. Just do very quickly. No. What I want a new note, and I want to add the built-in prototype action. I'm going to give this the code action. Paste and match style. And lo and behold, what you're now seeing is certainly the bits that are basic action code are beginning to color up. So, and you can see, for instance, another really useful thing. It's picked up the fact that I actually didn't close out. I didn't close out that statement there. So dictionary is now done. And also, if I now type in quotes, they won't get changed into typographic quotes. So that's something that you can do now. You can do in 9.5.2. I'm actually using 9.5.2. Not the latest beta, as my normal won't. Specifically in this case, because this is another thing, is I was trying to test a user's problem, and I've been caught out before by testing on the latest versions, often fix the very problem we were trying to find. So not a problem if you're not, unless you're on the backstage. Right, go ahead, Michael.
Okay.
I'll stop sharing.
So given that we have about 25 minutes left, what we're going to do now is I will walk you through the use of Tinderbox on qualitative data analysis for interviews, and to show you how I've gone through that process. And I will particularly demonstrate and focus on one particular problem that Mark and I worked through this morning, which was kind of exciting. So let me think. Exciting in a Tinderbox geeky kind of way. So let me see. I need to share a particular app. Nope. I'm used to sharing my screen differently. How do I share just that Tinderbox file? How do I share Tinderbox? So I don't want to share my whole screen, but I guess I will. How do you just share a specific screen? I'm so used to just doing my...
You press the screen share button and it shows you
I got it. I'm just used to showing it a different way. All right, so you all see my Tinderbox file? Yes, no? Good? All right.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what I'm doing. So I've been going through my doctorate, and I tried to dummy this down like 30 minutes before the call. So I apologize if there's some issues here. But I'm going through interviewing a bunch of content for my doctoral research. And just to set this up, what we've done is I had essentially done the interviews via Zoom. And I will show you a file folder. Let me see if I can share my screen that way. Might be easier just for me to share my desktop. Let me do this. All right, I'm going to share my desktop real quick. And then we'll do that. Desktop. Okay. So so you'll see here, here's the Tinderbox file, and I'll get rid of some of this extraneous stuff later. And one of the things that was interesting was this doctorate was the fact that I had where is the one I'm looking for? This one. Okay. I had the various files that I had from the interview. So here's the video for the interview. Here's the text transcript for the interview. And so what I did is I simply dragged those elements into the Tinderbox file. And let me just demonstrate that so people can see it. So if that's the file interview video, I could drag the local file that I had stored there like that. So that way, if I ever wanted to go back, I could pop up the video and take a look at the video that we conducted. So that was kind of useful for my purposes. So let me go ahead and stop sharing screen again and only share the Tinderbox file now. All right. Okay. So essentially I pulled in those file elements into the system, and you can see the date I did the interview, and it was 24 minutes long, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what's the next piece that we want to solve here, or what's interesting about what I wanted to accomplish here, is I was going through the interviews, and I hit like minute 205, and what that person was saying was essentially what if you read it in writing was gibberish, but when you actually listened to it, it made sense. And the reason being is people, as Mark and Anderson and I have spoken of quite often, is people will often speak in incomplete sentences. And so when you're listening to them, your brain can figure out in context of what they're talking about. The AI that does the transcript translation has no idea. And so when you actually, and you think about, oh, well, this transcript is crap. Well, you realize, no, actually, it's pretty good. It's just exactly what the person said, but it doesn't actually make any sense in writing. And so that's what I ended up having when I was going through the issue. And so so what I wanted to do is to be able to quickly jump to that timestamp in the particular video. And we know how to do that on Word, on the internet. But in Excel, for a local file, it really raised an interesting question. How do you actually pass a timestamp to QuickTime Player to start a video at a certain point? And the answer is you don't. Or at least I've yet to figure out how. And I stumbled across somebody who had this a couple of years ago. And it turns out that if you, on the end of a hookmark URL, so if, and for those that don't know hookmark, what you can do, and I'll just go ahead and do this, and I'll start sharing my screen and do full screen sharing again, just so you can see it, full screen, is in hookmark, what you can do is I can hit what is it, Command or Control C. So if I've selected the file here in the file and hit Control C, Hookmark actually produces and copies to the clipboard a URL. And if you paste that URL as a non-formatted text, that is the URL to that file. So essentially what Hookmark is doing is, what did you call it, Mark Anderson? URLizing, internetizing?
Well, it's basically it's giving you a sort of pseudo URL because it's not a real web thing, but it looks like a URL, but it's also effectively, I think under the hood, effectively, Hookmark is making an alias. So it knows where the file is, but it's allowing you to use the sort of the web behavior we're used to, where you just press a button, you press the link and the right thing turns up, and which also allows you to do the shtick of basically using an offset, which you're about to explain.
Yeah, so now let's demonstrate that. So I showed you before, I can click on that and I can actually get the file. Now by turning basically turning that path to a URL, I can do the same thing and get the URL to the file. And so now what we've learned is if you append a timestamp to the end of a Hookmark URL, that video will open up at the timestamp. So now let's go through and let me go through and show you how it works. And then if we have time, I'll be part of the dialogue. If not, Mr. Anderson will walk us through. So let me go ahead and just break this down. So here are the steps. So I've got my video and I've recorded it and I've done my interviews. Now, when I'm actually doing my analysis, I want to anonymize the analysis. So that brings me to here. So let me go ahead and do this, and I'll do this. So I say, I want to go grab the Hookmark URL for interview 08. And so I created a couple stamps that let me do that. So if I go here and I hit stamp and I say, go get me the Hookmark URL for 08. And this is the first kind of thing that Mark, and again, let me go through the demo. I'll show it to you and then Mark will explain the details. So essentially I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, go inside the folder, the ID of the note interview participants, and go grab the Hookmark URL for and I don't need that path for that particular note that is found in that path. And then I want to say, now I'll do the same thing and go find me the text for that. So what I've now done is I've essentially anonymized. If I'm doing the interview, I now know it's Lauren Becker during the process. I don't actually want to remember the person. I just want to look at their content as I'm analyzing their interview for anonymous purposes. So now I've anonymized all of that data into an anonymous note. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit explode, and I'm going to say, hey, can you guys see the explode box? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit explode at the hash mark space, and I explode out all of the notes. So now what I've done is I've parsed, just a minute, it should have exploded all of that. Let me see what I did wrong. Hit explode. I had two spaces there. Sorry, got it. I had two spaces in that. So now what it's done is it's exploded the interview at every conversational point. So now I'm just going to wrap that up and pull that under here. And I've got an on-add function that will then turn that into, I don't have an on-add function there, so I can do this. And now I'm going to apply my interview segment prototype to that. So now I've got another prototype for each of the individual segments of the interview. So now if I'm selecting that particular segment, and I'll give you that anonymous Lorem Ipsum one here, I can go ahead and apply the stamp, which I'll show. And actually, I'll show you with the stamp code in doing that. And so now what I want to do is I want to go extract the Hookmark URL. So what I'm saying is go get the Hookmark file URL from the parent, which is the anonymized note. And then I want you to construct the timestamp. First, I've got to get the time. First, I have to set the timestamp. So I'm going to extract the timestamp from the name. So I'm going to use this one. That's something. Sorry. Shit. Sorry. Extract. That one doesn't work. And what just happened?
If you just refresh the inspector, I think it's just got the lists got confused.
Got confused. Yeah, but I just lost. Interesting.
All well, right. Extract timestamp should work.
Yeah, no, that one doesn't work. It's definitely broken. Let me fix this one.
All right.
2. So this one works. Right. And what I need to do is, sorry, I just had some code in here that didn't work. That one will work. So if I do that, I had it just a second ago, and when I was moving the timestamps around, it nuked the timestamp.
Well, now you've changed the pattern, probably $4.
Yeah, I know, but I just.
Well, why not just put it in by hand at this point?
Right. So let me put it in by hand. So I'll add it in later, but so I've got and I'll fix it if we have time. I'll fix it. So I've got a timestamp of 01:39, so 1 minute and 39 seconds, and then I can use the URL stamp of where did that? Okay, and then if I apply that, what that's going to do is go get the hookmark URL from the parent and pull out add the timestamp code I need at the end of the URL, pound T equals, and then essentially calculate the time of 1 minute and 39 seconds into seconds. And then, so if we look at the end of the URL now, and I'll fix that. If you look at the URL now, we get 99, which is 60 seconds plus 39, which is 99 seconds. And so now if I click on that URL, it's brought me to 1 minute and 39 seconds of the video. So if I'm actually in the process of analyzing this interview and I'm like, what is this person talking about? All I need to do now is click on that and it brings me right to that point in the video. And that's just wickedly cool when you're doing kind of this kind of interview analysis. And then the last thing, and then to kind of do that for all of them, all I need to do is get the proper extract timestamp RegEx, which we'll fix in just a second, calculate that, and then extract the URL. And you can combine all these stamps together, but I put them into individuals just to make it more step-through-y. And then the last thing I want to show you that I've been doing with my interviews is I've got some hotkeys for highlighting code. So let's say I like what that person said, and I like what that person said. So now if I use the capture highlight stamp, it says response quote equals text.highlights equals blue. So any of the highlights that are blue get, so if you hear it, get pulled into this note as a list. And so then later I can run and say, and I'll show you in my real file now. Let's see if that opens up. And I'll give you an example of that in real life. So here's an example of that same interview. I got to stop sharing screen and share that particular file. All right. So here's an example of, nope, shared the wrong screen. This one. Okay, here's an example of that real interview. And I went through a process where I got all of their quotes and pulled them out throughout all of the process. And then as I'm doing the interview analysis, what I'm doing now is I'm saying, okay, for question number 6, and I'll show you here. So I then run an agent that says, go get me the responses of everyone I've interviewed for question number 6. And so here are all the responses and quotes that I've got from everybody from question number 6. And then I have another stamp that I'm running called collect responses. And so what that's doing is it's going through and capturing all the responses from all of the respondents. So I can go like that. And so here are all of the responses from them. Now I can copy and paste that, put this into another note, like up here, and start going through and analyzing those quotes and analyzing the interactions. And then I can then start doing my write-up for what we talked about. And so this is going to be a way for me. So here's an example, like the majority of Parsons did this. This is what they did to use the internet. What do you do online? So I then use that process and then go through and write about what they talked about, and then pulled out some of the more salient quotes. And then I can also then tie those quotes back to what they're particularly saying. Now, the one thing that I did, which was I just did before this interview, which I kind of enjoyed, let me show you this, is if I look at my collect response quote, which is not in the demo file I'm about to show you, you'll see here is I'm saying, hey, go collect the children of all of this response, put in this funky little tag, add in a bracket here, collect up the notes, and then when you paste it into the text, I want you to replace that funky little note with two forward brackets and get rid of the quotes and change the list items into basically line breaks. So what that results then is it's basically captured all of the blue highlights that I did for doing each of the interviews. And then you'll see here it's saying open bracket, the name of the interview and the timestamp. And so now if I actually add one more bracket, that immediately turns that into a zip link. And then if I click on that, I can jump to that particular conversation and then go to the specific spot in the interview and hear what they had to say. So, and so that way I'm getting a really interesting, automatically more efficient flow. And then like kind of final few minutes as I talk through this, one of the really important things about this is someone might look at this and like, why did you go through all of this effort to kind of automate this? Well, when you have 20 interviews, doing it manually for one interview, okay. Doing it manually for 20 interviews, pain in the butt, total human error interjected. So rather than spending the half an hour to do it manually once, I spent the half an hour to automate it. And so now I can do it automated whenever I want and not have to keep doing that. So that's the demo. Let me go back to the demo file.
You just quickly want to show the function you use for the...
Yeah. So that now I'm going to let you explain all of that because I'm going to have to leave in a second.
Have you got a file with that in?
I do. So
okay, cool. If you put it in the sidebar and then I'll grab that.
Yeah, let me go back to. So let me pause there real quick. Anybody? Well, you got me in for the last 7 minutes. Anybody have any generalized questions on what I was going through and why I was doing it? And then Mark can go through the details. If not, okay. So here is the snap. You want to explain that a little bit, Mark?
Yes. So we did a number of these, but essentially, the original question that got asked that led to this was saying, well, if I have a time, how can I have it in, if I want an interval, but I want it expressed as minutes, or I want it expressed as seconds. And so that was the top version where we'd said, well, give me the interval, say what unit you wanted in, and we'll convert it. Because the easiest way to work out what an interval is in time terms is to take a date and then another date with the interval added, and then take the date and then use standard Tinderbox test to get the difference between it, for which there are operators that give you the number of hours, the total number of complete hours, or the total number of complete minutes. But in this case,
hey, Mark, real quick, why don't you download the file and start sharing it from your screen? That way I can.
Yeah, have you put it in the?
It's in the chat. I sent it to Mark Bernstein. Sorry, send it to Mark Anderson. Send it to the wrong Mark. Here you go. There you go.
Right. Okay, got it.
So why don't you download that? You start sharing. In the meantime, I'll fix that regex from my other file.
Okay.
So what do you guys overall, while we're Mark's pulling that up, what do you guys think of the quick little overview? Interesting? Cool. All right, Mr. Anderson, take it away.
Okay. So just to roll back, what led to the final point of this was this first function that started out because the question was asked, well, how can I get time? How can I get an interval expressed as minutes or seconds or something? And I realized that actually, I mean, there are all sorts of ways you can do this. But one quite neat way is if you only want it in a particular unit, so you don't want the number of minutes, the number of hours, the number of seconds. What you want is I just want the number of whole hours, for instance, in it. we pass in an interval, and we just pass a string that says what units we want. And if we want it in hours, it matches this conditional, and so it takes the date now plus the interval we passed in, and then uses the hours operator to give us the whole number of hours. And there's a minutes operator, a seconds operator, and a days operator. In fact, there's a weeks operator. So you can get whatever granularity you want. Now it becomes more pertinent if you're just doing offsets. So the offsets, anything I've seen that's using video offsets in URLs tends to be using seconds. So you don't need, you can assume now what you want is seconds. If you pass in an interval, then we can add seconds. One of the things that we were tinkering around with earlier today when I spoke with Michael was a thing you need to be slightly careful of is that when you make an interval operator in Tinderbox, it has the sense of it being a time. So you see a string. So if I pick one of these, just check whether that's in there. Right, okay. If I pick one of these, what was the one you did? So it says 139 there, and you can be confident if it's a interval type timestamp that means 1 minute and 39 seconds and not 1 hour and 39 seconds. Where you want to be careful is if you're interacting, say, with some other system that may be passing you something that's number : number, it might be passing you hours and minutes. So just be careful there. But if you put 1 hour 39 minutes into Tinderbox interval, it will show it as 0139 : 00. So essentially, then you can just pass.
Hey, Mark, I got 2 minutes before I leave. One is the correct extract timestamps in there now. I had the wrong back reference. I was using back reference 4 instead of 0. And I just wanted to make one comment to Erwin's comment. Erwin, I used Otter AI to do the transcript. Yeah, and if you go back in the preamble, I said it's not that Otter AI did a bad translation. It's that the words coming out of the person's mouth was not complete sentences. It wasn't clear. Otter AI did a fine job translating the words, but if you actually look at the transcript to the words coming out of their mouth, the transcript was saying 90% correct, but reading those words versus hearing it come out of somebody's mouth, two totally different things. And I'm glad you understand, but some people may not, right? And that's one of the big lessons I learned from this process is as good as transcripting of audio is, it's like garbage in, garbage out. The words coming out of somebody's mouth, if it's not complete sentences, it's not going to read well. So that's just my kind of preamble comment. Now I got to go. All right. See you guys later. Bye-bye.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And having spent a lot of time in a separate sort of meetup that I'm in where I was actually working on transcripts, it's just one of those problems. But it's also a good reminder that when people go on about AI, just the fact that actually a computer does not understand what you wrote. It doesn't understand the semantics of what you wrote. It understands the probabilistic interrelation of the words that it managed to parse out of what you wrote. And those are often very different things. And it's something to bear in mind when people are bamboozling you about what AI can and can't do. Just to return to Michael's example. So basically what he's made, I think this was the function he was using. So he's passing in an interval. And one of the things that we were talking about was, well, if you weren't sure that the string that what you were passing really was an interval, in other words, if you thought you had an hours and minutes time, you had, number : number, this has a Boolean you can add. And if you say true, it will stick on : 00 on the end to turn what might have been misunderstood into hours, minutes, and seconds. These are all things that.
Hey, so Mark, real quick, if you look at the stamp extract timestamp,
yeah,
you can see where I'm calling the interval, and that may be helpful for people. I'm calling the function.
Yeah, so there we go. So that's in fact calling this one here. So in fact, we realized that when we actually looked more closely, that if you're working with a Tinderbox interval type attribute, you shouldn't have this ambiguity. But it's a thing just to be aware of if you're working between different systems and different assumptions. Another thing to bear in mind is if you are doing lots of transcripts, you may possibly be able, if you dig into the settings of the many offerings there are, you may possibly be able to get it to give you the offset within the interview in seconds rather than in minutes and seconds. I don't know, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's there, in which case you'd have the number available, which is another way to do things. But the neat thing here is what this has shown is you can take a Tinderbox interval. If you ask, well, why do you need an interval type attribute? Well, there you go. Here's a use for it. You've got a time there, and we can get the number of seconds from it, and then we can apply that to a pseudo URL, which gives us the offset, which means that we can jump to the position in the video, and suddenly something that would have taken you ages to do, especially many times over, when you're actually trying to concentrate on the intellectual understanding of what was in the transcript. And instead of chasing around pressing buttons and things, literally you press one button, up comes a video, and you can jump into the time where that occurred. I see Dave's got his hand up.
So Michael's gone. Maybe you can answer this or not. Given the ambiguity of words, is that transcript then annotatable?
Well, transcripts, I mean, the systems, I've used 2 or 3 of them. I mean, and Otter is one that gets mentioned a lot, are actually pretty good. They will give you generally, apart from dealing with things.
No, I'm not the behind the backstory of 10, 15 years ago. The Sakharov papers were moving from Brandeis to Harvard, and went to one of those meetings, and someone pointed out that quite often the annotations, the marginalia on documents was more meaningful, more important than the actual document itself.
Yeah.
And so particularly if you're reading a transcript, good or bad, you'll discover that someone's using a term that I recognize and you recognize, but they're using it in a way that I don't use it.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Words have so many meanings now.
I think we've been there today.
Yeah. So I don't know. Does anyone have any questions about what Michael was showing earlier? So will make sense. Anyway, if it doesn't, just ask in the forum. I mean, basically, he's got that. He'll be writing this up, and there will be a file, and you can go and play around with it. One interesting one that I know I worked through with him, which is another interesting sort of lesson thing that comes out of this was, let's go to here. So he asked me. So what I want to take. So for instance, from a note name like this, what I want is everything after the last space. To which my reply is, so what you actually want is the timestamp. Because sometimes when you're working with RegEx, it's easy to ask for what you actually want rather than what you get if you use an imagined thing. So the point is there are two spaces in this string. And RegEx doesn't sort of think in, you can tell it, give me word boundaries and things. But actually what you know is you want a timestamp. And a timestamp is going to be, if we say it's a timestamp, i.e. less than 24 hours, it's going to be 2 digits, a colon, 2 digits, a colon, 2 digits, a colon, 2 digits. Or you might just get that the first pair of numbers and colon might be missing. So if you just ask for that and you finish it at the boundary at the end, which is the RegEx $ symbol, then you don't have to worry about whether you've actually got the right space. So what by I seems the obvious parsing point isn't necessarily helpful. So in fact, what we've got here is, so if we read backwards and ignoring the the parentheses outside. In fact, what I'll do is if I just take this out of the parentheses are because he put some back references in. So I put that. So in other words, one way to do it is to just work back from the end, which seems counterintuitive, but we know we want the end of this bit of text up here. So we say we're going to start at the end, $. We're going to open a back reference because we want to be able to reuse what we find. Then we're going to say, well, we know we want between 1 and 2 digits because Murphy's law, somebody's going to give you something with a single digit for the seconds. You could use a plus sign. You could say one or more. Here would be more explicit. So what the curly bracket here means, it's saying \D means give me a digit. That's any character that's sort of 0 to 9. But I want it. I only want it if there are 1 or 2 occurrences together. So a run of between 1 or 2 digits. And then moving left again, we're going to expect a colon. And then we're going to expect the whole thing all over again. So that's the minutes. That's seconds, minutes, and then hours. Well, there may not be hours. So what we want is the same thing all over again, but with an asterisk. So we say, well, it may not occur. So if it's there, we want it, but if it isn't, we don't. And then the same thing for the colon, because we would effectively, it's the difference between this will match both and it will also match that. So if that's 23 minutes and 45 seconds, it can cope with that. It can cope with an hour, 42 minutes and 3. But as I say, you could write possibly a simpler reg. But I thought it was interesting. Right, and we're back again. I don't know what happened there. So, are there any questions on that? Nope. Okay. Well, is there anything else that people would like to raise?
Is there a preview of 9.6 I could see or something like that? Or is it coming out soon?
Real soon. In fact, it would be here now if the people on the backstage didn't keep breaking it and giving Mark more late notice headaches. It's real soon. Probably. I suppose the most noticeable thing will be posters, which is you can actually see shown in a previous video. There are a ton of things. I'm trying to think if I've got 1 second. Go to close that. I think because most of this has already been essentially been trailed. If I go to give you a flavor, what is the changelog? So there is a lot of stuff. A lot of them are small. A lot of them are things like that we just discussed. So things like being able to use square brackets for lists and things like that, which seem minor of themselves, but actually remarkably powerful. They're the kind of things that repay when you're trying to do some of the level of automation that Michael's been talking about. But I think I should probably let Mark talk about 9.6 insofar as he's willing.
Oh, I think that's pretty good, and I'll talk about it probably next meetup or the following one along with our invited speaker.
I think another interesting one that I will probably take people a while to get used to, but I think is going to prove to be really powerful is hyperbolic views had some really useful work done on it. It's a tool in the box that not everyone will need to use, but if you want to think about why things are linked and how they're linked, it's actually a remarkably powerful thing. But anyway, once 9.6 is out, the other thing is if you find your way. This is not the live page. This is a local test I've got of the new version. If you go to the change log, so following the normal thing that I do for ATBRef is that these empty ones will come out, but effectively these are all the top list is all the minor things that don't rate a note of their own. And then the list here links to every note that has a 9.6 specific change to it, whether it's a new feature or whether it's just a change. And you will find when it comes to where are we? If you have something, I was looking for something, an action. That's change. Anyway, you will find that if an action's changed from previously, it'll show when it was introduced and when the change occurred. So it just means, I mean, most people these days tend to run on the current version or very close to it. So this isn't normally a problem. It used to be more a case in the past where people were hanging back a bit. But as I say, very soon now you can read that, and this page will be part of for the live site if that's all right. Dave.
Yeah, if there's not a specific question anybody has, I figured I'd just offer sort of a video meetup blog post about my blog. Having been attending these things now for a couple of years, I'm actually by osmosis learning how Tinderbox works. And so I'm actually noodling around with my Tinderbox file that is my blog, Nice Marmot. And one of the virtues of a blog and having an online presence, or one of the aspects that Dave Weiner advocates for, is being able to do all your writing in one editor, one source. So all of your content is always yours, and you can distribute it then whatever way you want. So what I've used is RSS, and I've got a separate account for micro.blog. So when I publish Nice Marmot at my URL, micro.blog, even figured out how to post images to Mastodon from Tinderbox via micro.blog and the post. If you include a title, it post a link to the image, but it won't post the image. So I had to create a little, if I put an exclamation point in the title, I have a little parsing in the template, so it doesn't post the title of the note, and then it just appears.
Right. And we're back. David.
Am I led to believe that Mark Bernstein is the spiritual father of the various summer fests? Is that correct? You're on mute.
I'm on mute, but yes, I did start them and do much of the donkey work.
And it has been successful. My only complaint is I pretty much bought everything that's relevant.
Well, this is a problem, but it's a problem for the whole industry. But it remains absolutely our best time of the year, and it's quite a phenomenon. It is somewhat difficult for the folks who have less expensive products, because our reach is. We get lots of good people, but that means we don't have quite as many people as come for Humble Bundle or something like that.
Thank you.
No, it's interesting too, because in a sense, there's some of the sort of the better known or the larger apps in it. I mean, are all ones where if you're going to use it, you're effectively probably going to subscribe because that makes a sensible model. I mean, you effectively you're invested in it in the sense that the amount of time you're going to put into making it stand up and sing for you makes it worth the expenditure, which is difficult, swimming against the tide. I was always surprised when I was doing my doctoral studies recently, the number of people who just swore blind they wouldn't touch anything that wasn't free. And I just said, well, I was thinking, well, artists have to eat, software coders have to eat. I mean, at some point we have to pay for something. And just because you're being charged for it doesn't mean you're being seen off. And obviously some people have more to spend than others, but there are accommodations. So a lot of things, there are reductions in. Sorry, David, you have your hand up.
In the corporate field, basically there's sort of a rough rule of thumb. If you spend $1 on product, you have to spend $9 to get it working adequately across multiple people. So obviously the time of learning the butt in the chairs, that's the expense. It's $30 or $3,000.
Well, it's interesting, and I see also that David has hands up. It's interesting because I've been watching sort of Flying Logic, which is another interesting app that's out there, is sort of effectively, I think, going up the corporate route, where they have the reverse problem that if they go that route, their program will now be too cheap and people won't buy it because it's not expensive enough. I mean, it's an absolute ridiculous thing, and so it has nothing to do with the actual economics. I mean, it just the whole thing is insanity. Dave.
Yeah, it's probably off topic for our meetup, but I couldn't help but flash on. I guess it's Obsidian has decided to add properties to its entities, its blocks or whatever, and I'm thinking, sounds like attributes to me, but they have a very limited subset, so they have a long way to go.
Well, there's only a limited amount of innovation, you might say. Of course, that is not true at all. But yes, certain good ideas keep floating to the top of the pile, and it's sort of unsurprising in a way because a lot of things. I mean, you're seeing just this incremental growth. And if I look at Tinderbox 20 years ago, there's a significant amount of change. All these things we didn't know we needed all those years ago.
Well, I just wanted to express my appreciation for these meetups. I'll continue going. I'm actually, again, it's repetition and repetition and repetition. I think it's just the concepts finally become clear, and the anxiety or whatever of trying something diminishes. So,
well, and the range of applications. After all, today we started out with parsing a spreadsheet of family trivia questions, which is a nice example of incremental formalization. And our bulk was spent on automating transcript analysis for someone's doctoral dissertation and making that somewhat less onerous. I know people who've spent months doing this by hand, and it's not fun when you get to 19. And I've also reviewed papers where it's clear that they got to 20 and said, I cannot do one more transcript. And as a result, there aren't enough transcripts. And you say, this is a promising start, but you don't have results yet. Sometimes automation helps.
Where we cue Theo Baker?
Yeah.
I've just put in the sidebar because people were talking about, someone mentioned Ted Gorenson's about this particular outliner. So it was a column in about this particular Mac, which is a blog. I don't know, it's still going. I'm not sure it's still going. I think it's stopped. Anyway, there's an archive still online at that URL. And Ted wrote a wonderful series of articles with that sort of, more information we ever needed about outliners of the time. So obviously we're now some distance on from that, and other things have come about. But it was interesting then, and I'm sure to people who've not read it before, it's still sort of interesting because there's still some ideas there that maybe have yet to come back. Because often there are things like changing the technology, changing the way the operating system work or something, will kill things off. And I mean, I think back to the fact that on the old framework in Tinderbox, there was this wonderful thing where you could drag links between windows.
Mark,
using
just a quick comment.
Sorry?
Just a quick comment. The link that you put in doesn't seem... Oh, wait. Did you just change it?
Mark B, did you put in a correction? Mark's corrected. I do apologize. Yes, the later one looks right. Yeah, I obviously fat fingered the thing. Yes, so way back when, but then that was under the sort of the Mac UI where I remember being so outraged when just as I'd actually got used to having the old Mac metaphor of having lots of windows, they changed the OS and it went basically, and suddenly everything started becoming single window. And it just shows now. And indeed, there was much pressure from people when Mark rewrote the application for version 6. And I remember there were people were absolutely sort of firm about the idea this had to work within one window. And it turns out that, well, yes, up to a point, but there are lots of things that just don't work like that because you need to see more than one thing at once. And I certainly find in, the real work that I mean, in my own sort of research work and stuff, that's the key thing. I mean, one of the reasons I don't work on a phone or a tablet is I use two screens because I'm always reading one and sort of writing on another or annotating on another. And you just can't do that with a single window.
You, Mark Anderson, you bill by the number of miles your neck has gone back and forth.
No, it's not too bad. I mean, I've got a pair of I'm looking at a pair of 24-inch screens, and I have I'm running off a MacBook Pro that's just sitting on a riser there, which keeps my email client, and that's good enough. I mean, yeah, it's a luxury I have because it's my workspace and I can do what I like. But it is the thing. It reminds you of another lovely thing I saw about the time I was finishing my studies over at Southampton. So my sort of group was based as part of the computer science department, and there was a sort of large common lab space, and I happened to hear the sort of conversation going past, and this was the head of our department showing his colleague from sociology round. And he said, have you got any questions? He said, most people seem to have more than one screen, because effectively what would happen is people would leave and they never take the old screen. So you could tell how long someone had been there because they each year you'd add a couple of screens, which you'd find a use for, and they're all at different angles and whatnot. But yeah, when you're trying to do, I find some research work, you can't have too many screens.
So, Mark Bernstein, when are you going to put Tinderbox on Vision Pro?
Probably not, but we'll see.
Probably never.
We'll see. I've got some 2D visualization ideas to do first, anyway.
I did, because I got sucked in as part of the Future of Text sort of conclave. I got sort of sucked into doing virtual reality. I mean, it means very different things to different people. The thing I was quite interested in doing was effectively doing map. So what does a Tinderbox map sort of look like in 3D? And the answer is, well, it's not very helpful. It's just more stuff. Sort of 2.5. So, and it's not the 3D so much as having more space. And there is, I can't remember the name, but there is someone who's beginning to do quite interesting stuff. I mean, I find there's very little really being done about work in virtual environments. A lot of it is crikey, it's such Microsoft Bob warmed over, it's just Microsoft Bob in 3D. And you're thinking, well, is this really in advance? I think the interesting stuff and the sort of things that the Tinderbox community tends to do in terms of some of their map-based explorations ought to potentially offer something in a 3D environment. Now, what that means for applications, I suspect, is a whole new world of pain. And most of us don't really know how to do things in 3D yet. We've all got to learn. So I'm not sure it's as close as it might get. But the idea of essentially being able to sort, because much of what you're often doing on a map is this implicit thing where you're not necessarily making lots of links or lots of visible links, but you're putting, the blue things away from the green things and the dogs sorted separately from the cats. and we do that effortlessly. I'm having a bit more space to do that, so you've got another axis on which to do the sorting. But it's remarkably difficult. One of the primary limitations at the moment is that the Fresnel lens that they use to do the projection means that effectively you have to stand where the focus is. Now, we use our eyes effortlessly, and you can all look around where you are, and your eye focus will shift to look at to focus on the thing you're looking at. You can't do that when you're also working in a virtual environment. So if you want to read the thing over there, you've pretty much got to sort of pull it so it's at the right distance. So that there are some practical issues. I mean, the kit's getting better, and these will all be solved. But I mean, if I certainly not going to bet the farm on doing everything I do at the moment in 3D next year.
And I suspect, don't know how this is actually going to be used. The PCalc people, of all folks, had a wonderful essay on their Vision Pro implementation, which is okay. It's silly, but that's what they're about. Large games in your calculator desk accessory, and 20 years later, they're still doing it. But you can take your 3D representation of PCalc and put it down and forget where you put your calculator, which is a new experience. And let's not forget, last week's topic was an end user implemented large language model interface for working with large language model inside Tinderbox. Done complete without any real support from the developers at all. So, lots of things can be done now. Just takes a good community. So, see you all next week.
Yep.
Sunday.
I'll close out when everybody's gone. So, bye.